The lake had always been my sanctuary. Every evening after a long day, I would walk down the small stone path behind my house, kick off my shoes, and wade into the cool water. It wasn't just about swimming. It was about peace, silence, and feeling connected to something natural in the middle of a neighborhood dominated by manicured lawns and HOA rules. For years, no one had ever complained. The lake sat quietly between our homes, a shimmering piece of calm, and I thought of it as part of the charm of living here. That illusion shattered the day Karen showed up. I had barely swum halfway across when I heard her shrill voice cutting through the still air. "Excuse me, you can't be in there." At first, I thought she was joking, but the stiff posture, clipboard in hand, and the scowl on her face told me otherwise. She stood on the shore like a guard dog, arms crossed, tapping her foot impatiently as if my presence in the water was a crime. I swam back slowly, trying not to laugh. "What's the problem, Karen?" I asked, pulling myself onto the bank. Her eyes narrowed. "The problem is you are trespassing. That lake is not for personal use. It's shared property, and the HOA does not permit swimming." I blinked at her, dripping wet and confused. Shared property? My deed literally includes part of this lake. I've lived here 5 years and swam here every summer. No one's ever said a word. That's because no one ever enforced it. Until now, she smirked, clearly savoring the moment. "You'll be receiving an official notice. The fine is $1,500. I laughed out loud, certain she was bluffing. $1,500? For swimming in water that touches my backyard? That's insane. She leaned in, lowering her voice in that condescending tone she always used. "Rules are rules. If you don't like it, maybe this neighborhood isn't for you." Then she scribbled something on her clipboard and marched off without another word. Standing there dripping with lake water, I felt my anger rise. It wasn't just about the money. It was about the audacity of her power trip. A fine for enjoying my own backyard? I knew at that moment this wasn't going to be the end. Karen had picked the wrong battle. Would you like me to continue Chapter 2 in the same expanded 400-word style? The notice arrived 2 days later, sealed in an official-looking HOA envelope. And just as Karen had promised, it demanded $1,500 for unauthorized use of communal water access. The phrasing alone made me grind my teeth. It wasn't just insulting, it was completely fabricated. My first instinct was to ignore it, but I knew how the HOA operated. If I let it slide, the fine would grow, interest would pile up, and suddenly I'd be fighting a mountain of bogus charges. No, I needed to fight back, and to do that, I had to start with the rules themselves. That night, I pulled out the thick binder of HOA bylaws every homeowner receives but almost no one reads. The language was dense, full of legal jargon and clauses that seemed designed to confuse. Still, I combed through it page by page. Hours passed, and then I saw it. Nowhere did it say swimming in the lake was prohibited. In fact, the only mention of the lake described shared enjoyment and upkeep with no restrictions listed. That was my first clue Karen was bluffing. Didn't stop there. Curiosity turned into determination as I started digging into HOA financial reports. Each resident pays hefty monthly dues, and the money is supposed to go toward community maintenance, landscaping, lighting, and clubhouse repairs. But as I flipped through the spreadsheets, things didn't add up. Large sums had been allocated to special projects with no explanation. Even more suspicious were repeated charges for landscaping services, yet Karen's yard looked like a botanical garden while the rest of ours barely saw a trim. A neighbor, James, who lived 2 houses down, caught me outside the next day and casually mentioned his own run-in with Karen. She had fined him for parking his truck too close to the curb, even though no rule prohibited it. When I asked if he thought she might be misusing HOA funds, his eyes widened. I've thought the same thing. She's been president for years and no one questions her. That conversation lit a fire in me. Karen's $1,500 fine wasn't just about me swimming in the lake. It was a symptom of a much bigger problem. She had been abusing her position, twisting rules and lining her pockets for years. If she thought I was just going to pay up and move on, she was in for a rude awakening. This time, I wasn't just fighting for myself. I was preparing to bring her entire operation into the light. Do you want me to go ahead and expand? Chapter 3 next in the same detailed 400-word format? The HOA meeting was scheduled for a Thursday evening in the community clubhouse, and by then I had gathered more than enough ammunition. I had copies of bylaws, highlighted sections that proved my right to swim in the lake, and financial reports that exposed Karen's questionable spending habits. What started as a personal mission had grown into something larger. Neighbors who had also been targeted by her came forward, sharing their own stories. James with his truck fine, Linda who was charged for having a non-compliant garden, Noam, and even the Rodriguez family who were threatened with eviction over a paint color approved years before. It was clear Karen wasn't just strict. She was a tyrant in heels. That night, the room buzzed with unease as residents trickled in. Karen sat at the head of the long table, smug as ever, gavel in hand like she was running a courtroom. When the meeting opened, she quickly tried to move through the agenda, but I raised my hand. I have an issue that needs to be addressed, I said firmly. Karen's eyes narrowed. If this is about your fine, the board has already ruled. Actually, I countered, standing up, this is about much more than my fine. This is about how you've been running this HOA. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the room. I laid the documents on the table for everyone to see. Here are the bylaws. Nowhere does it say swimming in the lake is prohibited. Yet you fined me $1,500. And here, I flipped to the financials, are records of HOA, funds spent on special projects. Funny how those projects always seem to benefit your property more than anyone else's. Karen's face flushed red. She banged the gavel. Out of order. This meeting will not tolerate baseless accusations. Baseless? James stood up beside me, holding his own stack of papers. Then explain why my driveway was targeted while others with the same issue were ignored. Or why half the landscaping budget was used on your street alone. The tension in the room was electric. More neighbors stood, voicing their own frustrations. For the first time, Karen looked rattled, her composure slipping as she tried to shout them down. But the tide had turned. Her power was built on fear and silence, and now both were gone. By the end of the meeting, it was clear we weren't just confronting her. We were ready to take her down. Would you like me to finish with Chapter 4 expanded in the same way, around 400 words? The following week felt like the turning point in our neighborhood's history. Word spread fast about what had happened at the meeting, and by the time the next one rolled around, the clubhouse was packed. Normally only a handful of people showed up, but now nearly every seat was taken. Neighbors who had been quiet for years suddenly wanted their voices heard. Karen walked in, shoulders squared, trying to project authority, but the whispers and glares that followed her made it clear her grip on power was slipping. When the meeting began, she tried to gloss over the previous week's confrontation. Let's move forward with regular business, she said, tapping her gavel. But the room erupted. James stood and called for a vote of no confidence. I followed by presenting the financial documents again, this time with copies for everyone. In the room, people flipped through the pages, pointing out inconsistencies, inflated charges, and glaringly obvious favoritism. Karen's attempts to silence us with "That's not how you're interpreting it," or "This is confidential," fell flat. The more she spoke, the guiltier she looked. Finally, I stood and addressed the group. We've all suffered from unfair fines and manipulative enforcement of rules. It's time we take our HOA back. I motioned to remove Karen as president effective immediately. The room erupted in cheers, and within minutes the motion was seconded, then carried to a vote. The result was overwhelming, nearly unanimous in favor of her removal. Karen's face went pale as she realized the very people she had lorded over were now stripping her of power. But it didn't end there. With Karen out, we proposed a new clause. Any board member who misuses HOA funds will be personally liable for repayment, plus additional penalties. It passed quickly, fueled by the collective anger in the room. When the numbers were crunched, the misuse under Karen's leadership added up to a staggering $10,000. She was ordered to pay it back in full as she stormed out. Muttering threats under her breath, the room felt lighter, like the weight of years of bullying had finally lifted. That weekend, I walked down to the lake again. The water sparkled in the sunlight as I dove in, not a single voice shouting from the shore. Floating on my back, I couldn't help but smile. The fine was gone. Justice was served, and Karen would never bother us again. This time, the lake truly felt like mine.